I have owned my ranch for 20 years, and in all that time I have dealt with droughts, wildfires, broken fences, sick cattle, and even a mountain lion that once thought my barn was a hotel, but nothing prepared me for the day a fake H decided they owned my land and started sending patrol cars through my pasture like it was their private driveway. My name is Daniel Harper, and this ranch was never just property to me. It was blood, sweat, and the last thing my father ever handed down before he passed. 200 acres of rolling pasture, red soil, and fencing I built myself post by post with my own hands. The nearest neighbor used to be half a mile away until a developer bought the land east of me and carved it into a shiny, gated subdivision called Silver Creek Estates, complete with fake stone entry arches, decorative lanterns, and an HOA board that seemed to think they ruled the county. I stayed quiet when they built. I stayed quiet when they complained about my cattle smell drifting toward their new luxury patios. I stayed quiet when they sent me a letter asking if I would consider selling because my ranch was disrupting their community aesthetic. I did not stay quiet. When they tried to drive through my land, it started small. One afternoon I saw tire tracks cutting across my north pasture. I figured maybe a hunter got lost. Then it happened again. Fresh SUV tracks straight across grazing land where my heifers roam. Then one morning I watched from my porch as a marked patrol SUV slowly rolled through my open field, following the creek bed like it was a public road. I grabbed my hat, got in my truck, and intercepted them before they reached the back fence. The officer rolled down his window, polite but confused. He said dispatch showed an access easement through here, connecting Silver Creek Estates to the highway, and they were responding to a call inside the neighborhood. I told him there was no easement, not now, not ever, and I had the original land survey framed in my office to prove it. He radioed back, looked embarrassed, and turned around. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. The next week, 2 more patrol vehicles crossed the same path, this time faster, tearing up grass and startling my cattle. One of my calves ran straight into a barbed section and sliced its shoulder open. I spent that night stitching and cursing under a dim barn light. The following morning I drove straight to the county records office. No easement filed, no right-of-way granted, nothing on record. What I did find was something interesting. Silver Creek Estates had submitted a proposed emergency access route map during development planning, but it was labeled pending approval and never finalized. Somehow, someone in their HOA had convinced local dispatch that my pasture was an approved emergency corridor. I confronted the HOA president, a man named Richard Corman, who wore pressed polos and spoke like he was always in a board meeting. He smiled too much and told me it was only temporary while they sorted road construction delays, and that emergency vehicles needed access for safety reasons. I told him safety did not include trampling my livestock. He said perhaps I should consider being a cooperative neighbor. I said perhaps he should consider reading a property deed. After that conversation, the patrol drives increased, always claiming emergency response, always cutting through my field. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, vehicle numbers, dashcam footage from my truck, trail camera images, showing squad cars crossing fences where they had clipped wire. I sent a formal notice to the county sheriff and to Silver Creek's board demanding immediate cessation of trespass. The sheriff's office responded with a generic letter saying they would review access routes. Silver Creek did not respond at all. Instead, one evening I received an envelope taped to my gate. Inside was a printed HOA notice addressed to me claiming my fencing style violated community boundary standards, and that I owed compliance fees. I laughed out loud standing there in the dust because my ranch predates their entire subdivision by 2 decades. That is when I realized this was not confusion, this was pressure. They wanted my land. A straight line through my ranch would give them direct highway access, increasing their property values overnight. If I refused to sell, maybe they thought they could bully me into it. The real breaking point came during calving season. It was just after dawn, fog low over the grass, when I heard engines again. 2 patrol SUVs, and behind them a private security truck with Silver Creek's logo. They drove straight across my west pasture, scattering cows heavy with calf. One slipped in the mud and struggled to stand. I felt something snap inside me, not anger but clarity. I parked my truck sideways, blocking their path, and stepped out with every camera I owned recording. I informed them clearly they were trespassing on private agricultural land with no legal easement. The private security guard claimed the HOA board had granted emergency access rights. I asked him to show me a signed county document. He had none. The officers looked uncomfortable. They backed out slowly. That afternoon I called an attorney. My lawyer, Martha Ellison, had handled land disputes before, and she did not sugarcoat things. She said if emergency services believed there was an approved route, then either misinformation was being fed deliberately, or paperwork was mishandled. Either way, I had the right to protect my property. She drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to the HOA and the county, demanding written clarification within 10 days. We attached certified survey copies and documentation of livestock injury. Silence. 10 days passed. Then, instead of a response, I received a certified letter offering to purchase 20 acres of my north pasture at what they called a fair premium. The offer was insulting, low enough to make it clear they assumed I was desperate. I was not. I declined formally. 2 days later, patrol vehicles cut through again, this time at night, headlights slicing across my bedroom, window like searchlights. That was the moment I decided if paperwork would not stop them, steel would. I researched agricultural security installations and found industrial-grade removable steel bollards designed for farm gates, heavy, cylindrical posts set deep in concrete able to stop a truck at full speed. Expensive, yes, but cheaper than losing livestock or land. Before installing anything, I had Martha confirm I was fully within my rights as long as emergency responders were not legally authorized to use that route. Since no easement existed, I was clear. I ordered 8 bollards. Installation took 3 days. I dug 4 footholes along the natural path they kept using and set reinforced concrete sleeves. When the steel posts slid into place, they looked almost excessive, thick black columns rising from the earth, spaced precisely to block vehicle width but still allow cattle movement. I added reflective tape so no one could claim they did not see them. I also mounted large private property, now trespassing, now vehicle access signs at eye level. Then I waited. It did not take long. 3 evenings later, headlights approached again. I stood on my porch watching as a patrol SUV followed by the HOA security truck rolled confidently toward the creek crossing. They did not slow. The first vehicle braked hard at the sight of steel, but the security truck behind him reacted too late and clipped a bollard with its bumper crunching metal loudly enough to echo across the pasture. No injuries, just pride and plastic damage. I walked down calmly, phone recording. The officer stepped out staring at the posts like they had appeared overnight. I explained they were lawful property barriers installed after repeated trespass. The security driver started shouting about obstruction of emergency access. I asked again for documentation. None. The officer radioed dispatch. 10 tense minutes passed. Then the supervisor instructed them to withdraw and use the main paved entrance. For the first time in months, my pasture was quiet. But Silver Creek was not finished. Within a week, I was served with a civil complaint claiming I had illegally obstructed a critical emergency route endangering residents. They requested an injunction to remove the bollards immediately. Martha smiled when she read it because attached to their filing was the same proposed map marked pending approval from 2 years ago. No signature, no county seal. We filed our response including evidence of livestock damage, video footage, and certified confirmation from county planning that no easement had ever been granted. The hearing was set 3 weeks later. During that time, not a single patrol vehicle crossed my land. Interesting how quickly behavior changes. When steel is involved out in court, their attorney argued community safety and implied moral responsibility. Martha argued property law and presented documentation chronologically, showing deliberate misrepresentation to dispatch. When the judge asked directly whether any recorded easement existed, the HOA attorney admitted no. Formal easement had been executed. The judge denied their injunction request on the spot and warned that further unauthorized entry could expose them to liability. I watched Richard Corman's confident smile disappear for the first time. After the ruling, something even more interesting happened. 2 homeowners from Silver Creek approached my gate one weekend. They apologized. Apparently many residents had no idea the HOA board was pushing to acquire my land and had been told emergency services already had full rights. When word spread about the lawsuit and the denied injunction question started surfacing at board meetings, financial disclosures were requested. It turned out the developer who originally built Silver Creek still owned several unsold lots and stood to gain significantly from direct highway access through my ranch. Pressure from within began mounting against the board. Weeks passed peacefully. My cattle grazed undisturbed. The bollards stood firm like silent sentries. Then one final move came from the HOA, not aggressive but desperate. A new purchase offer arrived, this time higher, almost reasonable. It included a clause requiring removal of all installed barriers and granting permanent access rights. I declined again, not because of money, but because once land is sliced, it never heals clean. 3 months later, Silver Creek held a special election. Richard Corman resigned, citing personal reasons. A new interim board sent me a formal letter acknowledging no legal access across my ranch and confirming they had corrected dispatch records to prevent future routing errors. They also reimbursed me quietly for documented livestock injury costs, likely on advice from their new counsel. I never removed the bolt. I did repaint them once bright safety yellow, just to make the message unmistakable. Some people ask if I regret escalating things. I do not. Boundaries exist for a reason. When you let someone redefine them without consent, you lose more than land, you lose principle. My ranch remains whole, 200 acres, uncut, unpaved, unclaimed. The steel posts still stand at the creek crossing, catching the sunset light each evening. And every time I see them, I remember that sometimes the simplest solution is not louder words, not longer letters, but solid, immovable. Steel placed exactly where someone assumed you would never dare to put it. Out here the wind still moves. Across the pasture the way it always has, cattle still follow the fence lines. and no patrol car has crossed my land again. Sometimes protecting what is yours does not require aggression, just resolve, reinforced with concrete 4 feet deep. I thought the steel bollards were the end of it, but what I learned about people like Richard Corman is that when you block their path, they do not turn around, they look for another angle. For about a month, things stayed quiet, almost too quiet. No patrol vehicles, no security trucks, no headlights cutting across my pasture at night. My cattle relaxed. I relaxed. But silence in disputes like this is rarely surrender, it is strategy. The first sign came in the mail, a thick envelope from the county tax assessor, notifying me that my property classification was under review for potential zoning compliance inspection. That had never happened in 23 years. Agricultural land does not suddenly get questioned unless someone asks questions. Martha confirmed my suspicion someone had filed a formal complaint suggesting my ranch was being used inconsistently with agricultural code, likely an attempt to pressure me financially. 2 weeks later, a county inspector showed up, polite, clipboard in hand, apologizing. Before he even started, he admitted off record that several anonymous complaints had been submitted, claiming unsafe fencing, hazardous animal containment, and illegal water diversion from the creek. I walked him across the property myself, showing him every permit, every water right document, every veterinary record. He found nothing. He left, shaking his head and quietly saying, "You must have irritated someone important." I told him I had irritated someone entitled. Then came the online reviews. Silver Creek residents started posting vague warnings on community forums about living next to unsafe livestock operations. They complained about noise, smell, runoff, and even claimed my cattle were aggressive toward hikers. The irony was almost funny considering their board had been sending vehicles through my grazing fields. But what bothered me was not reputation, it was intent. They were building a narrative. If they could not force access legally, maybe they could create enough public discomfort to justify county intervention. I decided it was time to stop reacting and start investigating. A friend of mine, Tom, who runs a surveying company, helped me overlay development blueprints from Silver Creek's original submission with updated satellite imagery. What we discovered explained everything. The subdivision's main entrance road had been constructed 2 feet narrower than approved and curved at a sharper angle than designed, likely to cut costs. That design flaw made emergency vehicle turnaround difficult during peak congestion. The proposed temporary pasture route through my ranch was not just convenient, it was their solution to a construction shortcut. If my land became permanent access, their liability vanished. Armed with that information, Martha filed a public records request for internal HOA communications regarding emergency routing. What came back weeks later was explosive. Emails between the developer and the HOA board discussing leveraging agricultural adjacency and encouraging compliance through municipal channels. In plain language, they had discussed using county pressure and emergency service routing confusion to push me toward selling. It was not accidental. It was orchestrated. We amended our legal position from simple defense to potential countersuit, not for revenge but for protection. Intent matters in court. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened inside Silver Creek. Residents began demanding transparency about legal expenses. HOA dues had increased twice in 6 months, supposedly for infrastructure improvements. Instead, a significant portion had been diverted toward legal consultation regarding my property. People do not like paying to fight battles they never agreed to. One evening, just after sunset, I heard engines again, but this time they stopped at the Bollards and did not attempt to cross. I drove down and found 2 sheriff deputies standing outside their vehicles examining the posts. They were not there to drive through. They were there because someone had reported my barriers as dangerous obstructions to emergency response. I handed them the court ruling denying the injunction and documentation confirming no easement. One deputy quietly admitted dispatch had finally corrected their system, but complaints were still coming from the HOA board claiming I might remove access during a life-threatening event. I looked at him and said if there were ever a verified life-threatening emergency and lawful request, I would open any gate necessary, but I will not accept fabricated routes as permanent entitlement. They nodded. They left. That was the last official visit, but the pressure shifted financially. A new certified letter arrived stating Silver Creek intended to pursue eminent domain through a petition claiming public safety necessity. That crossed a line. Eminent domain requires governmental authority, not HOA preference. Martha immediately contacted the county attorney, who confirmed no such petition had legal standing without municipal sponsorship, which meant the HOA was bluffing or hoping I would panic. Instead of panicking, I commissioned a full independent appraisal of my ranch, including projected long-term agricultural value, environmental impact assessment, and water rights evaluation. The report concluded that slicing a road through my north pasture would significantly disrupt grazing patterns, reduce land value, and introduce runoff contamination risk. In other words, permanent damage. We sent a copy of that report directly to every homeowner in Silver Creek, along with a polite letter explaining the situation and attaching copies of the HOA's internal emails. Discussing pressure tactics, I did not attack. I simply presented facts. The effect was immediate. A community meeting was called. I was not invited, but several residents forwarded me recordings. Voices were raised. Questions about fiduciary responsibility flew across the room. Why were dues funding land acquisition attempts? Why were emergency access representations misleading? Why had the developer's construction deviations not been disclosed? Richard Corman tried to defend the board, claiming strategic necessity, but trust once cracked rarely reseals. Then something almost poetic happened. Heavy spring rains hit the county harder than any in recent memory. Silver Creek's narrower than approved entrance road began flooding at the sharp curve, because drainage grading had been compromised during construction. Emergency vehicles struggled navigating the bend during one particularly severe storm. Residents finally saw the real issue was not my ranch blocking safety, but poor initial development choices. And for the first time I received not complaints, but support messages from inside the subdivision, thanking me for standing firm because it forced examination of deeper problems. The developer attempted one last maneuver, quietly proposing mediation. The offer this time was substantial enough to tempt most landowners. It included payment well above market value for a 30-foot access strip, plus promises of aesthetic fencing and landscaping buffer. On paper, it looked generous, but mediation documents also required a non-disclosure agreement preventing discussion of prior misrepresentation. That told me everything. They did not want partnership, they wanted silence. I declined mediation. Instead, Martha filed notice of intent to pursue damages for documented trespass, livestock injury, and reputational harm based on the internal communications, proving coordinated pressure. The filing itself shifted leverage dramatically. Lawsuits are expensive, especially when discovery exposes uncomfortable emails. Within 2 weeks, the HOA's insurance provider became involved. Insurance companies dislike intentional misconduct. Pressure inside the board intensified. By late summer, Silver Creek held another vote this time, not just replacing the president but restructuring the board entirely. The developer representative lost his seat. A new president, a retired engineer named Carla Mendoza, reached out directly requesting a face-to-face conversation, not negotiation but resolution. We met at the property line near the bottom. She admitted the previous board had pursued the wrong strategy and that most residents simply wanted peaceful coexistence. She confirmed they were redesigning their internal road layout to correct the original construction deviation, even though it would cost them significantly. She did not ask me to remove the bot. She asked only that if ever a verified coordinated emergency required temporary access, I consider cooperation. I told her what I had told the deputies: lawful communication earns cooperation, deception earns steel. Over the following months, tension dissolved slowly. No more letters, no more inspectors, no more patrol confusion. Silver Creek invested in widening and reinforcing their main entrance properly, this time under full county supervision. It cost them more than my original land offer ever would have, but integrity delayed becomes expensive. As for the bollards, they remain. Some call them excessive. I call them memory anchors. Each steel post represents a lesson: boundaries must be defended early and clearly. If I had allowed that first mistaken patrol drive to slide, perhaps today, a paved road would cut through my pasture, and my cattle would graze beside traffic noise. The most satisfying moment came quietly one afternoon, when a county emergency management vehicle pulled up not to cross but to consult. They were updating regional response maps and wanted confirmation of private land barriers to prevent future routing errors. My ranch was officially marked as restricted agricultural property, no vehicle access without owner authorization. Permanent, documented, respected. I sometimes ride out to the creek crossing at dusk, just to stand beside those posts listening to the wind move through tall grass. Conflict leaves marks even when resolved, but so does resilience. Silver Creek still exists beyond my eastern fence, manicured lawns, and mailbox clusters glowing at night. But between their pavement and my pasture stands a clear, unambiguous line set in concrete 4 feet deep, reinforced with steel and experience. People assume disputes are about money. Sometimes they are about precedent. If a well-funded board can manufacture pressure to force one landowner to yield, it sets example for the next. I did not just protect acreage. I protected the principle that ownership is not negotiable through intimidation. And in the end, no dramatic showdown was needed, no shouting matches, no fences torn down, just documentation, patience, legal clarity, and when necessary, immovable barriers. The fake access route disappeared from every system. The emergency calls now follow their proper roads. My cattle calve undisturbed. My nights are dark again without headlights sweeping my bedroom walls. Steel does not argue. It does not negotiate. It simply stands, and sometimes that is enough.